not going there, no matter what. So that's what question one. And question two, you guys have met a lot of cool people here. Who do you think is full of shit? Who do you think that you are comfortable enough to reveal? It's just, that guy's paid, that guy's making money, that guy's just full of shit. That's it.
Trying to get me in trouble. I think one of the craziest things would be archaics. If you really get into his material, it's really deep and dense, but it is also like level 11 wild. So it's archaics. Jason Bashir's. I interviewed him once. People want me to have him back. I heard some weird stuff about his incarceration. I know we all do our time, you know, we can make mistakes, but like I think his version of events is a little different than what I've read, and that makes me I could just interview people who haven't been to jail for unsavory things. But his material is interesting. I don't know. But a simpler one is when I interviewed the guy who is 100% convinced that we all died in 2012 and was making the case that this is just any reality after that is a fever dream. And I just love that a person can be like totally diehard convinced of that and go on a show and make that case and confidently be like, yeah, that's my argument. I'm sticking to it. It is one of the craziest things.
Well, I'm glad you're here.
Yeah. Am I though? Am I? In your mind, in your last breaths as you die out in the year 2012 when it actually is. And then there are people who are full of shit. I mean, that's kind of easy. David Wilcock, I put at the top of the list. And then I also put Stephen Greer pretty high up on the list. You know, somebody said to me off air that they consider Stephen Greer to be a discarded Rockefeller asset. And that really stuck out to me because imagine you do get employed by the system to play a role in a subculture, to steer it a certain way, and then your usefulness is up. And they kind of like cut the leash and they stop sending you money. You still have to live, you still have to pay the bills, you're in this thing, you kind of double, triple down on your position, and you kind of flounder. Like when I look at Stephen Greer, I see a guy who's like trying to keep his head above water and barely treading water. And I think he's obviously full of shit. He'd be high up the list. I don't know if I'd throw anyone else under the bus, but I think those two are pretty safe. You know, people know I love the Hollow Earth stuff, so they've always asked why haven't I had Corey Good on, and that's why. Is like he's up in the Wilcock milieu. I think the 20 and back is bullshit. You know, people might have heard me mention him in a little book club with my San Diego friends, and we're reading fictional books, and my friend's last pick was called Old Man's War, and it was a sci-fi book from, I think, like 1998 or the early 2000s, and the premise of the book is that you when you age, you can sign up in the military to get a young body to go fight in the alien wars. And I was like, that's the Wilcox stuff. That's the 20 and back program. It's just ripped from a fictional book. I just think that's the most insane premise because why would they even let you do that? Like if you're shipped off to be a janitor on the Mars colony, like then they have you do that until you die. Why would they bring you back to a 20-year-old body so you can do podcast interviews? So that's one of the craziest things. But yeah, that would be my answers. What do you think?
Yeah, this Stephen Greer full of shit thing is a really good example. David Wilcock is like, I actually think he's just fucking crazy. Like, some of it's a scam, but I also, like, he thinks he's like a time-traveling return to Ed Casey. Like, fuck, like, there's scams, and then there's like, no, you need to go to the hospital. Like, that's not right. So I'll have to think about that. The trouble with magic, like maybe guess, but just like people in my world that aren't in conspiracy world, because Dr. Greer is all of that and also a fucking closet case. So yes, he's full of shit in a bunch of ways, and that's, anyway. So I would have picked him as well, because in magic, there are people who are in the world of magic that don't think it's real. And for me, that's quite a long list of people that I think are like blatant scamming fraudsters, charging $700 for like a collection of poorly spelled emails, just like brazen like Facebook scammers, right? So that's my version of it. Stephen Greer is a really, really good example of like, no, this is all fake. You were just like running the scam, and now that you're not funded to run that scam anymore, you're just gonna run it with like your little, I don't know, little camping trips and what have you, for 22 to 26-year-old men. Now, as for like the weirdest shit I've ever been told, this isn't actually even podcast related. There's been a couple of times in my life where I've been around people who have told me stuff. Like one of them was my fucking cleaning lady in London, and she was from Lithuania, no, somewhere in Eastern Europe, Latvia. And Latvia, because she was older than us, they're in the Cold War and behind the Iron Curtain and so on. And it emerged in a funny way of spirit that, like I learned about this after about a year of her coming every week to clean the place. Which is like, oh, I'm in this like channeling, meditation, energy group, like Ascended Masters, that kind of world, right? Stuff my mother's really interested in. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Like I do magic, I have a magic podcast and so on. And we were talking about during the Cold War, because this was 2014-ish, like the beginning of the Ukraine, like, oh, I guess NATO's going to try its op on Russia again. And I asked her about that. And she said, Gordon, I have seen everything. I have seen every kind of spy in my life, in my area. I have seen Soviet spies. I have seen American spies. I have seen off-planet spies. I have seen interdimensional spies. The Cold War in my area of the world was a battle for reality. And she just said it, like this is this woman who like comes and cleans the house and I'm like, oh. Like I kind of low-key believe that. And there's been a couple of them. There was another time, there was an event, the event that Austin and I did in LA. And afterwards, because he has weird friends, as we all do. And so I ended up at this guy's house who was the son of someone high up in intelligence. And he had this, we're all old enough to have watched Buffy, and like he lived in this converted warehouse that looked like the Bronx. And he had his like Freemason library down his one side, and he apparently made all his money as a social media agency. But then, it got to about 3 a.m. and we were drinking this $500 bottle of bourbon, and he's like, listen, my dad got me these jobs, and that was essentially part of like the Arab Spring, like moving opinions around online, because it was that era, right? And so it made a bunch of money. Let me tell you some things about what's going on off planet. And then he started telling me about like how Intel and all these like chip companies that are probably profitable still have like off-planet bases where they're testing things. And this is like at 3 a.m., 2/3 of the way through a bottle of bourbon conversation with a guy essentially dressed like a vampire, living in a converted warehouse in Silver Lake, but like the son of like high-ranking CIA who made a bunch of money working for he was like 17 at the time, working for his like dad, doing social media for the Arab Spring. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm to do with this information. Other than tell people in Florida 10 years later, like, what the fuck? But there are moments in my life that I just had these windows. One time in New Zealand at a wedding, I met the guy who drove some IRA bombs into London for like the Canary Wharf bombings, because it was an Irish NZ wedding. And I met this guy and he's like, oh yeah, the IRA told me to like drive this van. I'm like, don't look in the back. Into fucking Canary Wharf, this is like 1985 or something, and leave. And he did in like a day. I'm like, what the fuck are we doing with IRA bombs? Like, so I had this weird life where a very THC reality will just occasionally be like, that's odd. And it's come from the strangest places of people that I believe are terrorists, because like, he's like, oh yeah, well, oh, that was so fucking weird too, because he just like slept. Me and my friend Paula, by the way, so he's this unattended woman, 21 years old, best friend of mine at the job I had at the time. And this guy didn't have anywhere to stay. He's a terrorist, and he told me this fucking story. He's like, I don't have anywhere to stay. Can I sleep in the cup chair? And I'm like, what the fuck am I gonna do? All right. So the strangest stuff that's happened, like the strangest stuff I've heard has been in situations outside of like my job, that have been like, oh, this person isn't lying to me. They might be wrong, but they're not lying to me. And that's like off-planet, interdimensional spies, and I don't know what to do with that.
I love that. Yes, and I would just add I want to get to more questions, but I would just add really quickly, like if you were in San Diego, if you got on the bus, you might have saw my car. My car's got a big crazy wrap on it. So that invites people to, first, they'll be like, if they want to talk to me, they'll be like, what's this about? What's this wrap about? Like, because they see the UFO on it. And then I tell them, and then what they really want to get to is to tell me their story. And they're not listeners, they're just people in the world, whether it's like an electrician who comes to the house and sees a car in the driveway, or someone at a gas station before, or in a parking garage. And none of the stories are absolutely like crazy unique, but I would just say that routinely, maybe once a quarter, somebody will tell me about the UFO experience they had. And you just realize, like, these are people who are not reporting to MUFON. They're just like they're like, this happened to me. I really never talk about it. You're a guy with a UFO on your car and you're pumping gas and I can tell you, and then like, we're gonna not be a part of each other's lives anymore. But what is interesting is that a theme that keeps coming up with those conversations is they will say, I saw a UFO, and then I'll say, oh really, tell me a little more, and they'll say, well, it wasn't really a UFO, it was more like an angel. And like, I've heard, I'd say more than 50%, they kind of start with it's a UFO and it becomes more of a religious type of entity or something less nuts and bolts craft. And that's just interesting.
If someone else, because I have a response to that, wants to come up there, I just want to say that this is another part of our function.